Government Orders of the Day number 1 and 2.
Children, Young Persons and Their Families, Youth Courts, Jurisdiction and Orders Amendment Bill, Committee Stage continued. Judicial Matters Bill, Committee Stage.
I declare the House in committee for further consideration of the Children, Young Person and Their Families, Youth Court, Jurisdiction and Orders Amendment Bill and consideration of the Judicial Matters Bill. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker. The House and Committee for further consideration on the Children, Young Persons and Their Families, Youth Courts, Jurisdiction and Orders Amendment Bill and consideration of the Judicial Matters Bill. Members, we move first to the Children, Young Persons and Their Families, Youth Courts, Jurisdiction and Orders Amendment Bill, and when the committee last considered the bill, debate on Part 1 had just commenced, and the Honourable Leanne Dalziel has just over 3.5 minutes remaining of her call. Should she wish to take it?
Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Leanne Dalziel.
Mr. Chairman, I do want to complete my call because when we were last debating this matter, I had a series of questions for the Minister, but essentially focused around the primary issue, which is why, when the government is so close to announcing the whānau ora program, which we're all waiting for with bated breath, just as they're about to do that, and we heard the Deputy Prime Minister in the House today talk about what that was intended to bring about, why would we be bringing down the age of criminal responsibility for offences beyond murder and manslaughter, which are already covered by the existing legislation? It makes no sense that we want to attach youth liability, young person liability to a child when we are in the midst of seeing a change in the way that we approach early intervention. So that's the issue that I have as a concern. We are essentially saying that you're too young to be a babysitter, but you're not too young to appear in a youth court. And that, I think, is fundamentally wrong. In the second reading on this bill, I asked a question around the names of certain individuals. I asked to Alexander Tokorua Paihopa and Whatarangi Rawiri and Philip Kokazi, Ricky Rapira and Joe Kokazi. I asked who those people were. And nobody in the House actually knew the answer to that question. And I actually took a long time to find the answer to the question when I went looking for it. And I found it because the only reporting that was consistent on this particular case that it relates to was the one that read, Michael Choi was brutally murdered nearly 4 years ago by 6 thugs, including this country's youngest killer, Bailey Jr. Kuririki. Now, Bailey Jr. Kuririki is the only one we ever hear about in the media. And why was it? Because he was so young. He was this baby-face killer. But actually, Bailey Jr. Kuririki, although he did wrong in terms of the group that he was involved with and the phone call that he made to entice a pizza deliverer to the house so that an attack could be made, and it isn't clear whether he knew when he made that phone call that that would end up with the pizza deliverer being killed. No one will ever know the truth of that. But the bottom line is that he didn't actually physically kill Michael Choi. 2 people were convicted of murder, and it was the 4 others who were convicted of manslaughter. Why does the Minister want to have 12 and 13-year-olds put in the position of Bailey Jr. Kuririki for the purposes of offences less serious than murder and manslaughter? How on earth do we ever start talking about rehabilitation at this very young age? We are talking about children in accordance with this piece of legislation. Why would we want to make them liable to appear in a youth court and be exposed to the kind of coverage that Bailey Jr. Kuririki was exposed to, and look at the consequences that coverage has had on that young man's life. Almost irreparable.
Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr. Chairman.